Morning, everyone. Before we get started, my name made it on the list of speakers. Brad's did not, but Brad Wright, he is a right-of-way specialist out of the Augusta area. He covers Augusta, Statesboro, eastern half of the state, and is our most senior right-of-way specialist for the state. So he didn't make it in there. And also, he and I did this presentation in Columbus. Some of y'all might have been there for that. One thing I forgot to do is to thank Tim Smith. He's the Georgia Power representative on the Prescribed Fire Council, and he's really the reason that we got here and got hooked up with this. And Tim does land management. So he does a lot of prescribed burning. He does a lot of forest management activities on our bulk property around the state. And I just wanted to say thank you to Tim. He couldn't be here today. He was double booked and had to be at another meeting, but I wanted to mention him. Also on the list, it has me as, I think, the right-of-way specialist for Northwest Georgia. And in March, I actually transitioned over to the transmission forestry side of things. So a quick plug about that. I've got the territory basically from just north of Columbus, Pine Mountain, LaGrange area, up to Trenton, over to LJ and back across. Any of you that own property in that area that have transmission lines across it, I'd be interested in talking to you about management, because as you saw in the last presentation, the prairie habitat, grassland habitat is perfect for what we do. It's very compatible. And I know just in my area, I've got Paulding Forest WMA, Sheffield WMA, Chattahoochee National Forest, and then my counterpart in Metro has National Park Service land, and we've both got some Corps of Engineers property. So after this meeting, if you'd like to talk to me about that, and one of the conflicting things I have is I have to do danger tree patrols. So we trim trees or cut them down that have the possibility of falling into a transmission line. And the conflict is I like leaving those for snag trees because they're great habitats. So a lot of times we'll top them off just to get clearance so they don't fall in the transmission line. Some property owners hate that. They don't want a standing snag. They want it cut down and then we cut up into firewood. So I have the ability, the way I manage my transmission lines, I have a program where I can put notes in there for each parcel. And so if we're working with you to do some management activities, to leave standing snags and that kind of stuff, I can actually keep a record of that. So after this meeting, if you want to grab me, we could talk about that, and I can get that entered into our database so we can make sure that what we're doing on the transmission line is not conflicting with what you're doing as a resource manager. So having said that, I'm going to hand it over to Brad. He's going to get us started on the topic here.
Got it. Good morning. On behalf of myself, Ben, and Georgia Power, I just want to say thank you for letting us be here and have a chance to speak this morning. We, as Ben said, have done this a couple of times now, and each time I learned something new. So Mr. Harper, the last presenter, that was outstanding. I appreciate it. But to what we're here for. I've already broken it. That didn't take long. Oh. No, I didn't. I apologize. Okay. So what is right-of-way services? Essentially, we are responsible for the high voltage transmission line corridors throughout the state. We manage that from essentially every aspect. Now Ben is a forester with that effort. And so we got the right of ways on a cycle to be maintained, creating a good habitat for Georgia Power. In the practice of that. Now, what I manage is more or less the use of those right of ways. So we try to protect them, but also try to be mindful that other people, property owners, city, county, developers, everyone need to use the property. And so we try to work with them to allow them to use the property, but not adversely affect the business that Georgia Power is in. Yeah, I covered that slide. So our personnel, we have a supervisor in our group. There's 10 right-of-way specialists, and we have a couple of contractors that help us manage that. So from that, you can tell that we have pretty big territories. I've got the yellow portion there. I think I've got about 22 counties. So having said that, I think there's about 18,000 miles of transmission line in the state. And that's extremely hard to manage when you've got a big territory. So I'll get to why we're here today. We're here today to ask you guys, partner with you guys, learn from you, and hopefully to educate you on what we have out there, how prescribed fires are affecting us. And there are some adverse effects. We've had some trouble, particularly recently, more so than it seems like in the past, with structures being compromised. And so we understand it's a right. We want to support that. In fact, like Ben was saying, we try to manage the right of ways ourselves, but we also want to partner with others. We want to get the word out there. We want to try to have the right contacts to reach out to. And also we want to be able to intelligently talk to property owners about ways to burn off their properties while protecting the right of ways. So what are ways that we can do that? Well, that's part of what we're trying to learn and part of the reason why we're doing these presentations. So as I said, adversely affects us, right? I mean, a picture says 1,000 words. So, you know, how did we get to this point? Obviously it was the intensity, right? The last year was, the intensity was a little bit too hot, I believe, on this burn. And how does that adversely affect us? Well, these are not the structures that serve your homes. These are structures, the cross-country transmission line structures. That could have taken us 3, 4, 5 days to get back up. That particular line could have served 30,000 customers, right? Because it's substation to substation. So if we didn't have a redundant line, another way to pick up that load, then those customers were out. You know, it might not be so bad on me, but if it was serving a nursing home or a hospital or some of your loved ones, it's pretty important. And so our goal today, like I said, is to educate and ask for help managing this and controlling this. So we greatly appreciate it if you can get out the message. We'd also greatly appreciate it if you can send some folks to us to talk to us, to help us, to brainstorm, to try to prevent this. So that tells the story, right? 2 blue sky days, one you have a pole, one you don't. And so that must have been pretty high intensity as well. And now I'm gonna hand it over to Ben to kind of talk through some of the things that we are trying to protect.
And we both work at the power company, so a lot of stuff we talk about, we take for granted. But if you got questions, raise your hand. Last time in Columbus, it went really well because we had a lot of good questions, a lot of good interactions. So don't hesitate to raise your hand. But what are you talking about? Or if you got any questions about what we're talking about. So safety. And a lot of people don't know this. This is something that was kind of new to me when I started working for Georgia Power is, so there's going to be a presentation after us about particulate matter, right? Well, particulate matter in the air actually can conduct electricity. And so when you get heat and particulate matter, then there's a distance, they call it minimum approach distance, but the higher the voltage, the shorter that distance where electricity will actually arc. And so your transmission lines aren't like the wiring in your house. There's no insulation on them. So you see a bare conductor, it's metal. There's nothing to protect that. And so that distance decreases with the amount of conductive particles in the air. So when you're burning and you're getting smoke and carbon, that reduces that distance. Also, something I didn't realize until I came to work here is as load increases, so you think in the summertime when it's 95 degrees and everybody's running their air conditioning, our lines heat up, the more electricity you're running through it. So just like your house, you've got a breaker box that's got a 50 amp fuse or 100 amp breaker or 200 amp breaker. So the voltage stays the same, but as we run more current through it, the amperage increases. That heats those transmission lines up and they actually sag, and it can be quite substantial. The higher voltage lines and the higher the load, sometimes mid-span, 8 or 10 feet or more, that they can sag. Well, the same thing happens when you burn underneath the line. That heat rises, it also causes that conductor to sag. And when same thing, you're reducing that distance to where it can arc over to something, person or object underneath the transmission line. So safety, that's the primary concern. The electrical flash. And then another thing that folks don't realize, again, very similar in your house where you have a breaker box, we have breakers and switches in transmission substations and along the line, but those don't operate until the current goes to ground, which means it actually has to flash and hit somewhere. And every single one of our transmission towers has a down lead on it that goes to either a ground rod or a counterpoise in the ground. So the voltage has to go somewhere. So it does go to ground, and then that goes back to kick the switch. So between the time it goes to ground and the time that breaker kicks off, you could have our transmission voltages vary from 46,000 to 500,000 volts. So that's a lot. And recently we had a incidental safety call where one of our bush hogging crews got into a section of overhead ground wire had fallen on the ground. And when they hit it with the bush hog, it threw it up in the conductor. It started fires at 4 or 5 separate locations, some of them a mile down the transmission line, because that current ran to all those structures until the equipment operated. So like let's say with transmission, you're talking about 46,000 to 500,000 volts. That's not something to play with. So safety is the first concern. Second, Brad mentioned it, is reliability, because this is the bulk power system that goes from power plant to power plant and power plants to substations. So when a transmission line goes out, if it's what we call the shoulder season, so if it's like spring or fall and there's not a lot of power demand, it's fairly easy to switch that out and to use a redundant line. But in the summertime or in the winter, when people are either using heat or air conditioning, then you can cause a rolling blackout, serious power outages, by taking one of the transmission lines out of service. And then financial impacts. As with most things in life, the bigger it is, the more expensive it is. So with transmission, for us, it's roughly, I think they say, what, $100,000 to touch transmission structure, somewhere in that neighborhood. So you're looking at probably a minimum of $100,000 for one damaged transmission structure. Then replacing if the conductor's damaged, guy wires are damaged, if there's other structures damaged. So there's a significant financial cost. So obviously safety, if you were out there when this tower came down, one, it's dangerous to be in the path of the tower coming down, but then also, again, there's had to be an electric flash until the system operated. And just another picture. And a caveat to this, Brad, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think so far all the incidents we've had recently, none of those have been timber related management. They've been mainly grass fields and running fires that weren't necessarily planned out. And there's another example of a transmission structure, just the financial impact. And there are instances, if the landowner is found negligent, then we will go back and pursue having the property owner pay to replace the structures, because, as we all know, everything's getting more expensive. Power rates are going up, and it seems unfair that all the ratepayers would cover damage that somebody did being negligent in damaging a transmission structure. You or me? Question? They burned at the base, almost all of them, except for the one that Brad showed you earlier. It completely burned up. Like it started smoldering at the stump, and it burned all the way to the top, completely disappeared.
So it's a double pole structure, right? It's what we call H-frame. Yeah. So when the first pole gave away, the weight of it snapped the other pole.
Yeah, and this actually has a steel I-beam cross arm. It's almost like a piece of railroad track. That's what goes across the top of it.
No, that's your order. Okay. But it doesn't matter. However you do it.
So best management practices. This is, somebody mentioned earlier, where's the gentleman? You said you had property with Powerline. So, and we'll answer questions here in a minute, but the first speaker said contact GFC, right? Is there a burn ban going on at the time? Get the permit, talk to somebody. contact the registered forester, contact your Georgia Forest Commission office, get somebody that knows what they're doing to come out there and help you with a burn plan, make sure you're burning on the right day, the right humidity, and all the proper steps been taking place. So the second one is sort of controversial, and I'm gonna read it and we'll talk about it. Any best management practices used for control of fire should take place outside of the easement area unless approved by Georgia Power. So if you read any of our literature, you go to our website, it's all gonna say no burning allowed on the transmission line, and that's with a period at the end of it. But what we're here to do today, you're a group of professionals, we know that you do land management. So there are times when this can be done properly, but you need to come to a right-of-way specialist, somebody at Georgia Power, and we need to discuss it and figure out if we can do it in an appropriate manner. And that includes fire breaks, water spraying, fire retardant applications, erosion control, soil stabilization, all those things. And Brad and I talked about this, a week or two ago. Somebody that had good intentions, but didn't necessarily execute it the best way. They went around one of our towers and did a fire break, but they left all of the standing dead grass that high in between the fire break and the tower. Well, it jumped the fire break and it burned the tower structure down because they didn't completely clear the area on the tower. So notification of a Georgia Power right-of-way specialist 2 weeks prior to any burning near the electric lines. And that just gives us time, because Brad said earlier, these guys have big territories and they're in high demand. And so a lot of times they're booked up 2 weeks out. So that just gives them time to actually visit the site, take a look at it, and get back to you. And special attention should be given to protecting easement areas with wood structures. And that just kind of goes without saying, right? Because it's visible when a wooden structure burns to the ground and they're flammable, obviously. What you don't see a lot of times, though, is our steel and concrete structures can also be damaged by heat, just not necessarily as visible, but they also can be damaged from high heat and heat exposure. I guess that's it. Yeah. Any more questions? Dickerson.
No, he's talking about the spike in damage. No, we don't have any, apologize, we don't have any historic data on that. It's just that we know we've been out more often and we've had more issues than previously. Now, there previously is in my experience, right? I've been with the power company about 15 years. I'm not going to say that we haven't had, ups and downs, but it's just kind of been upticking. And so we're just, we were tasked with trying to get the message out, just trying to find out what we could do to help. And we realized that the majority of the folks in this room are not the audience we're looking for, but we hope that you come in contact with them, right? If your neighbor, property owner, the guy that manages the hunting club, if anyone asks you the question, maybe you'll have the answer and maybe help them get in touch with us or help them be mindful of protecting the structures that we have out there. Yes, sir.
Yeah, develop pre-plans, and so that way it's good for the next 10, 20 years, whatever, as long as we follow these steps. You have to prove that I have contact you every 2 weeks ahead of time, every time.
Can I answer that?
Yeah. No, we got it.
So yes and no. And so I dealt, as I mentioned earlier, my previous role when I was doing right-of-way specialist, I dealt with Sheffield and Paulding Forest, and we would meet and talk about their burn plan. So yeah, they were good to go because we discussed it. The problem with like 8 or 10 years is that the rules and regulations change. So probably it doesn't hurt every year. But to your point, 2 weeks is the minimum. I really would like to talk to somebody as you're developing your burn plans for the next year, what you plan to do, what kind of burn units you're looking at. Then we're good. Then you don't have to worry about it. Because if you're waiting, in other words, the previous speaker said, every day can be a potential burn day, right? So if you get a good weather day, you don't be sitting around waiting on Georgia Power to call you back to approve your plan. So the best time to do it is today and talk about your upcoming management plans. And there was a fellow that came to the one in Columbus. He was a forester actually doing some land management over in Floyd County. And we were able to meet in December, get it all taken care of. So when he got a good burn day, he could go ahead and do what he needed to do.
Was a gentleman over here.
I'm curious, are we talking about just major transmission lines, or are you talking about all the EMC smaller power lines as well, being part of the, the percentage of problems that we're now having?
So for us, it's just transmission lines, and that's what our group deals with. And not to say it's not a big deal for the other stuff, because I'm sure it is, but as Brad mentioned, the transmission system's the backbone, bulk power, and when we had a couple of those go down, our management came to us and said, we got, this has got to stop, we got to fix it. So yes, it's an issue with the lower voltage lines. That's just not what we deal with. And I'm not sure if they have that kind of resource, but I would still reach out to them before you do it and and get their feel for it. I have no idea.
Yeah.
And since the burn, that pressure treated wood will burn and smolder for a day, and then the fence post gets followed over. So we swap everything over to T-posts for that reason. Like that one picture where you have the entire pole disintegrate going, that pressure treated stuff. There's no fire intense stuff. That will burn day all the way.
That's exactly right. That's what happens, and it so for us, your low voltage, which for us, the lowest voltage transmission we have in the States, 46 kV, 46,000. That's almost entirely wood pole. The next step up is 115 kV. That for a long period of time was historically wooden H-frame. So that, like you saw the two poles with the crossbar at the top of it, 115. 230 and 500 are almost exclusively concrete and steel, and 500 are the ones that you see that are the massive towers that look like an erector set, that are the skeletonized. That's the highest voltage. So those are always steel. And generally 230 kV, the next step down is concrete or steel, but almost everything historically 46 and 115, which is the 115 is probably the bulk of the mileage of the transmission system are wood poles. Now, as we're redesigning lines, we're going back with concrete and steel every time. So eventually there'll probably be a lot less, but right now I'd say it's probably greater than 50%.
A lot of people are going on that structure, right? People walk around to reduce the damage to structures. Does that work on the power lines? In other words, if we reduce the level of fuel by working safely, will that reduce the amount of damages? And if so, is there a way that we can protect those wood transmission posts on our land instead of having to clean around every time? Is there a way to simply and easily protect them so that we can control our regular?
So unfortunately, like a lot of things, because the varying construction methods used around the state and the structures, really it's the best to talk to that specialist in that area and go look at it, because there's not a blanket answer, even for just wooden poles, because again, some of those, we've got poles that have been out there for 50 or 60 years. The type of wood, the type of chemical used to treat them, that's all changed over the years. And so unfortunately, there's not a single, I wish I could say yes, there is, but it really is dependent upon what's on your property at that time.
And then, I mean, our maintenance program, we're not burning, obviously on the right of ways, but our maintenance program that we have should, generally speaking, produce the results that you're looking for. I mean, I would say you end up with, in ideal situations, a prairie-like, stand on the right of way.
But if we did burn, would that remove that excessive fuel from the right of way? Therefore, you're not worried about wildfire, lightning strike, accidental jump fires.
So yeah, so but talking to your specialist out here, like I said, it's hard to give a blanket yes or no with all the variables out there. So I wish I could say yes or no, but if Yeah, if you read the rules, the rules say no period, but we're trying to say, well, we're willing to work within reason to, you know, come to a workable solution. And there's a question over here.
Explain that, that's what I like it, can you explain the difference between CCA poles and the creosote poles and how, I think a lot of it is people, the fire goes through, people don't, oh, it burns safely. Why do they think it's safe and then it falls over the next day? What's the difference there? Can you explain that so people understand the difference?
Say that again.
CCA versus creosote.
Oh yeah, you just the chemical treatment, right? The flammability, right? And that's what I'm saying. So it depends upon the type of treatment and the flammability and volatility and all, you know, flash point, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there are some chemicals that you can get an ember in there and it's going to smolder all night and burn the pole completely in half. Whereas some of them it'll get on there and it's not going to do any damage at all. But we replace poles from time to time, and so you very easily could have on one property poles that range in age from 50 or 60 years old to poles that were put in last year. And that's the reason we can't give a blanket. Is there something you can do, yes or no? Because that varies from pole to pole and property to property.
I don't know what your maintenance thing looks like, and it wouldn't work 100% of the time, but I would think to prevent a wildland fire, not a prescribed fire to burn up the wire. If you took something, you know, better living through chemistry, there's all sorts of herbicides. You can make bare granite within the 3-foot radius. I would say when you're
Yes, and that's what I'm willing to talk to people about.
home, and then that way, if you had a wildfire making a run, at least it's gonna reduce the flammability of the pole.
100%.
So,
And
are you doing any of that?
so because we're broad scale maintenance, there's no way to do that on the scale, but that's the reason I would really like to talk to any property owners to do that kind of stuff, because kind of in the previous presentation, we're actually in the process right now, we've been doing for about 10 years roughly, maybe a little longer than that, research plots on various herbicide mixes. And of course you got control plots, we're not doing anything. And then some that we're keeping our mowing regime, some are taking the mowing regime out and then going over time and trying to figure out what the best chemical mix is, because you know, for us, we want the grassland. We don't want the forest land. Or savanna type. We want all grassland, and trying to figure out what's the best to get that type of habitat and also reduce. We don't like the briars and brambles either, because that's a flammability, and also it's just a pain in the neck to try to work through from a maintenance issue. So we're doing that. It's just not for the particular reason for wildfire, but eventually I think what we're going to come to is something that's going to be beneficial for that as well.
I'm gonna add a couple questions off there, so
Good.
thank you, Ben, thank you, Brad, applause.